Hi, welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by me, Janine Turner,
and Cathy Gillespie,
with students
Kari Chapman
and me, Tova, Kaplan.
Join us as we discuss hot topic issues with constitutional experts. It's sponsored by Constituting America.
Welcome to Constitutional Chats, hosted by Janine Turner and me, Cathy Gillespie, along with Constituting America's student ambassadors, Tova, Kaplan, and Kari Chapman, where we talk about hot topic issues with constitutional experts. We want to thank this week's sponsors, Charla and Trip Davenport. Charla was actually at our founding in 2010 of Constituting America and has had us in her classroom when she was a classroom teacher. And Charla and Trip, we very much appreciate your sponsorship of today's show. So the topic for today is the Electoral College and how electors are chosen. And before I get to introducing our exciting special guests, I'm going to introduce our panelists and our members of the show. First of all, it was my great pleasure and honor to introduce my friend, actress Janine Turner, who is famous for her role as Maggie O'Connell in television's Northern Exposure. Janine is the founder and co-president of Constituting America, which launched in 2010. Janine is still acting, but she's also actively teaching kids about the U.S. Constitution, having given over 540 speeches to classrooms across the country. And if you want to book a speech with Constituting America, just go to our website and click our Book a Speech big red button. Okay, I want to also introduce Tova Kaplan. Tova Kaplan is 16 years old, a junior in high school, and lives in Chicago, Illinois. Tova currently serves as the National Youth Director for Constituting America and runs the National Youth Advisory Council like a CEO. She is a three-time winner of the We the Future contest in the entrepreneurial category, where she created a marketing plan, the PSA category, where she created a PSA entitled Know Your Rights, Read the Constitution, and STEM, where she created an app. And Tova is currently working on bringing her app online so that we can all download it, and we're very excited about that. Tova is passionate about educating and empowering young people to use their constitutional rights. Tova, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be an amazing webinar, and I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you, Tova. Next, I'm going to introduce Kari Chapman. Dakare is our Constituting America student ambassador. He's 18 years old and is currently a senior full-time college student in South Carolina. He's won Constituting America's We the Future contest twice, once for Best PSA, where he reminded viewers the Constitution is an American thing, so know it, and twice for his short film, Man on the Street. Dakare is also actively involved in our National Youth Advisory Board. He's a working actor, seen most recently in HBO's Righteous Gemstones and in Netflix's Outer Banks. Dakare wishes to be an actor, but also a politician, but says you must be an actor to be a politician. Dakare, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. It is my esteemed honor to be in front of two electors today. So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm excited to learn a lot.
Thank you, Dakare. I also want to introduce Jeanette Cranack, our operations director. Jeanette is a former teacher, a former PTO president, and she books all of our school speeches and does all kinds of great work for Constituting America. Jeanette, do you want to say hello?
I'd like to say hi and a special welcome to all of our teachers that are viewing today. When the show's over, send me a little note how many kids you had with you today on the Zoom, and if you need some constitutions for your classroom, we'll get them out. So Jeanette at constitutingamerica.org, and thank you so much to our guests today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. And finally, Lisa Williams, our media director. We could not have this Zoom without Lisa. She makes it happen. Lisa, you want to say hello?
Thank you, Cathy. Hi, everybody. If you want to see this or any of our other podcasts on demand, you can go to the archive on the Constituting America website. It's right under the signups for the Zoom. You can also find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere you listen to a podcast. So thanks everybody for being here today. And we're really looking forward to this one. Excited.
Well, great. And now for our two very special guests. This show grew out of a couple of shows that we had had on the Electoral College, where so many of our audience members had said that they had never met a real elector. They didn't really know how they would ever go about becoming an elector. And we thought, why not have two electors on to tell us about their experiences? So we've got two electors with us today, Martha Jenkins and Christine Pelosi, who between them have a variety of political experience serving as electors from two different states, two different political parties, in order to give us just the broadest view as we can of how the different electors function in different states, because every state functions differently in how they select their electors. So first, I'm going to introduce Christine Pelosi. Christine is an attorney, author, and advocate serving as counsel for We Said Enough and founder of Impact. She has worked as a deputy city attorney and assistant district attorney in San Francisco, special counsel to HUD in the Clinton Gore administration, and chief of staff on Capitol Hill. Christine was elected as California Democratic Party Women's Caucus Chair and Democratic National Committee Executive Committee Woman. She's the author of Campaign Boot Camp 2.0, and the Amazon bestseller, The Nancy Pelosi Way. She's traveled to 41 states and 4 foreign countries, conducting call to service trainings to thousands of leaders. A member of the San Francisco Giants Community Fund Board and proud public school mom, Christine resides in San Francisco, California, with her husband, Emmy-nominated filmmaker Peter Kaufman, and their daughter, Isabella. And Christine, would you like to say hello?
Thank you for having me. Thanks to the donors for bringing us and organizers for bringing us together. And I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. We're so excited to have you. And now we have Martha Jenkins. Martha was elected 4th Vice President of the National Federation of Republican Women, NFRW, at the 40th Biennial Convention in Indianapolis and took office in January 2020. She is the director of NFRW Region 7, which includes Delaware, the District of Columbia, Maryland, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia. She's also the advisor to the NFRW Legislation and Research, Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Resolutions Committee. Martha is originally from Virginia and majored in history at the College of William and Mary. She and her husband, Ed, live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They have 2 daughters, Kimberly, 26, and Mary, 21. And Martha, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And just last week, my 21-year-old turned 22. So I'm glad to be with all of you today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I hope all of us learn a lot, including me.
Well, thank you, Martha. So Christine, why don't we start with you, and you tell us just a little bit about your experience as an elector, and then we'll have Martha speak for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Well, I was an elector in 2016 for Hillary Clinton in California. I had joined the campaign as a volunteer in 2014, and as chair of the California Democratic Party Women's Caucus, I was obviously very excited about the prospect of electing the first woman president. Well, only one part of that happened, but in the fall of 2016, I asked my congresswoman, who happens to be my mom, Nancy Pelosi, if I could be her electoral appointee. That's how we do it in California. The members of Congress and the 2 senators are the ones who make the appointment, and where there is a vacancy or where there, shall we say, a disinterest in the member of Congress or the most recent Democratic nominee doing that, the state party fills in. It happens relatively late in our state. It's due in the beginning of October. So in California, at least, the focus for the member of Congress or for the state chair is really on the people who've been loyal to the nominee for a long time. Because as with anything else, as you all know in politics, when you're making appointments, you have a lot of disappointed people and one very happy person. So you have to explain to the disappointed people, what are the qualifications and justifications for that person. As it turns out, we had quite a tumultuous experience because I led a group, the Hamilton electors, who wanted a briefing on intelligence. And so that added to, shall we say, the fervor and attention that the Electoral College was getting. But the very practical elements of being an elector, and we'll get into more of this with the Q&A, what was the most fascinating to me is after a very important presidential campaign that was based a lot on online activities, what actually happened when we got to the state capitol is that we took out our pens and we signed 8 different pieces of paper, because we had to sign our intentions for president 4 times and for vice president 4 times, with tellers going up and down the aisles of the legislative chambers in Sacramento, with the whole book of signatures, making sure that not only everybody signed the requisite number of times for our Secretary of State, for the National Archives, extra copies, etc., but also that since we were collectively signing on the same page in some cases, that we actually signed our name where we were supposed to sign our name, and if not, they had to rip up that piece of paper and start the whole process over. So it was kind of interesting that after we go through all these thoroughly modern elections, we were back to not quite quill pens, but pens and paper in a very tangible way of marking our choice for president and vice president that reflected the outcome in our state. And I, again, appreciate everybody coming together, and I look forward to learning a lot myself. Thanks.
Well, that's fascinating. And, you know, one of the most fascinating things is how every state seems to choose their electors in such different ways. And in California, you know, we've learned through you that the electors are appointed through the various the 2 political parties. But in North Carolina and also in Virginia, where I'm from, the electors are actually elected at their congressional district conventions of their respected state parties. And so Martha Jenkins, who is with us from North Carolina, is going to tell us a little bit about her experience becoming an elector in 2016. And I think Martha may have actually been an elector in 2004 as well. So Martha, do you want to share your experience a little bit?
Yes, and that's correct. I've actually been an elector twice. I'll go to 2016 first. I let the district chairman know at our April convention that I wanted to run for elector, and we had someone else running too. I don't really remember, but I think we may have had 3 or 4 people running. But because I've been involved for so long in my district, and the district hasn't changed a lot, more people knew me and more people were comfortable with me being the elector. And so I was chosen at our district convention in April to be the elector. In 2004, I actually was the alternate elector at large for the state, because each state has 2 at-large electors that represent the 2 Senate seats, as I know Christine knows. And one of the district electors, I believe it was the 10th, wasn't able to serve. I think it was a technicality. He wasn't qualified, and so I filled in for the 10th district, even though I didn't live there. I filled in. I was the 10th district elector in 2004. So Christine, we did do a lot of things the same once we got into our state capitol. We met in the House chamber. We elected our president and our secretary of the Electoral College. And we were first given ballots that we all filled out. And then, as you say, we had to go through and sign all the paperwork after it was done. And I was telling Cathy yesterday a really interesting little sidebar from 2004. Our Secretary of State had prepared the ballots, and she had prepared a couple of extra in case someone, you know, mismarked their ballot. And one elector got 2 copies of the ballot, and I guess he thought he was supposed to complete them both, because when our secretary was counting the votes, she said, "We've got an extra vote here. We're going to have to vote again." And so then we all actually stood up and stated that we were voting for George W. Bush. Again, that was in 2004. So there was no glitches in 2016 and no extra votes. But it was quite the experience. And ahead of time, it was actually very different in 2016 than 2004, because in 2016, because of all the controversy around the election, those of us in North Carolina, and I suspect in every state that voted for President Trump, we got multitude letters. I'm not saying that right. We got lots and lots of letters and lots of emails asking us not to vote for what we were legally bound to vote for, because in our state, when you're an elector, you're legally bound to vote for how your state voted. So I think my husband saved all of the letters I received because he thought it was historic. So they're still in our garage.
Oh my gosh.
That's very interesting. Well, both of y'all have, it's interesting how your experiences are both similar and then also have some differences as well. And before we go to the questions, I thought, Lisa, do we have the timeline that we're going to put up just for a second? I thought I found this helpful when I was looking into this, just sort of some of the dates that govern the Electoral College. So we all know that in the spring and summer is when the electors are chosen. November 3rd is election day. December 8th is what we found that it said the deadline for resolving election disputes. Now, December 14th is the day this year for the meeting of electors. And I think Christine had mentioned yesterday, it's the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. And so that falls on December 14th. And then December 23rd is the deadline for the receipt of ballots. January 6th, 2021 is the counting of the electoral ballots in the joint session of Congress. And then, of course, January 20th, 2021 is Inauguration Day. So we thought it might be helpful just to show everybody those dates so they could have them in their heads. And
I polled my region because I have a regional seat on the Democratic National Committee Executive Committee. So I asked the Western states people. In New Mexico, they vote at convention. In Alaska, they vote at convention. In Oregon, they vote at convention. In Washington State, they vote at convention. And the way they do it in Washington State is they vote for the people who constitute the congressional district county chairs. And then that person, in addition to being the county chair, is also the elector. So California is really an outlier. It seems like half of the other Western states do it the way they do it in North Carolina, which is by convention earlier in the spring.
And I think it's fascinating that all of the state legislatures meet essentially, all the different electors meet at the state capitals essentially on the same day. Again, the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. And so that's just something, really cool. So Tova, we're going to turn it over to you and let you ask the first question.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to our electors for joining us. This is so exciting. And I really like that we have a elector from both parties, because one thing that's really important to us at Constituting America is the idea of civic conversations, which is being able to work with and talk to people who have different opinions than you. And all of that is really what makes our political processes work and what helps our republic function. So I was wondering, how in your job as an elector do you work with people who have different opinions with you? And how do you work towards unity? How do you still allow, the process to function, even when you're working with people who you disagree with?
Christine, do you want to take that first, or?
Sure. I would say that I would offer two things. One, as my mom always says, there's a kaleidoscope of politics. So people look at an alignment of where people are in a particular bit of legislation or a particular issue, and then you shake the kaleidoscope and then those people could be somewhere else. So for example, if you look at climate, which is something that is so urgent right now with the West on fire and the South under storms and people concerned about conservation, you can have, they have what they call the hookers and anglers, that's fishers, people who are fishers who are also connected with hunters because they want to conserve the land on which they're fishing and hunting. But they've also found common cause with very conservative environmentalists who are evangelicals because they believe that the earth is God's creation and there's a stewardship component. So you can have those balances. I am the co-founder of the DNC's Veterans and Military Families Council. And so in that work that I do to engage veterans, you know, there aren't Democratic or Republican or independent members of the military. They're American members of the military. And so you have to work together on veterans issues. In fact, I would say that probably, and I don't, Mary would agree, but probably if you look at legislation over the past generation, that's probably the most bipartisan legislation we get is on veterans issues because everybody has a stake. And I think that for me, the idea is, how are we going to rally around the issue, whether it's healthcare, whether it's public education, whether it's the environment, whether it's veterans. If I go in there as a Democrat, I mean, people know who I am. I don't have to wear Democrat on my sleeve for people to know. Then that can automatically turn off a lot of people. But if I go in there as, you know, the cousin of a service person who wanted to start an organization to give veterans a home in my political party and talk to people on the other side of the aisle or people who are independent, we can focus on the needs of the veterans. And so I think the most important thing to do is to say, what am I trying to accomplish? And I'll just close with a quote from the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who always said, fight for the things you care about, but do that in a way that will lead others to join you. And that's what we're trying to do, is to have at least have these coalitions around the issues so that we can make progress there, even if on a given day, it's going to be a Republican who will technically get the win or a Democrat who will get the win. Hopefully the issue wins at the end of the day.
The kaleidoscope is really interesting, and as well as finding common ground on the issues, because that's really what America should be all about, is about issues, you know, and not, and I'm with Tova. I find this really refreshing that we have both political parties and we can all come together and talk about something. It's just heartening. Okay, go ahead.
Martha?
Okay, so it's my turn. I just think it's really important for all of us as Americans to remember that we are Americans first. We're Republicans or Democrats second, but we're Americans first. And if we care about our country, and if we care about our Constitution, then we need to work together on the things that we can work together on. We need to know where we're able to compromise or where we're not able to compromise, but we have to walk away as friends, even if we disagree. I think it's very, very important for all of us to learn to agree where we can, disagree when we must, but agree to be agreeable. So one of my mentors, one of her favorite words was civility. And so I hope there's a lot of us who need to learn how to be more civil to each other. And I hope that that will happen. Really do.
Well, thank you, Martha. That was also just a very good answer. Thank you. Do we have Dakare?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Hey, Dakare, do you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to ask about how like the results are transmitted in Congress and like the joint sessions.
Christine, I think you've been there twice for that.
I have.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about what that's like?
Sure. So what happens, Kari, and thank you for the question, is that, and I will say, as a daughter of a politician and the wife of a filmmaker, we can have a whole talk about acting in politics. But one of the things I always say to my candidates and to my colleagues in service is act the scene that you're in, right? So we have to, you have to be present in where you are, and picking up on what Martha said, what is the thing that you're doing that's right in front of you? Be civil there. And so 2 examples of that: in 2000, when it was time for the joint session of Congress, after everything that had happened with the Florida recount, all the way going up to Bush versus Gore and the, United States Supreme Court deciding by one vote that the Florida recount would stand where it was and not be extended. The Vice President of the United States presided over the joint session of Congress and the opening of the electoral ballots. And in that case, the Vice President was Gore, and the winner he was announcing was Bush. So talk about civility and acting the scene you're in. He wasn't in the scene of a debate with Bush or a campaign against Bush or the heartbreaking concession he made to Bush. For him, at that moment, he was the president of the United States Senate, which is the role of the vice president, and his job was to certify that election. And so when people got up from the state of Ohio, the late Congresswoman Stephanie Chubbs Jones got up from Ohio and said, I object to the electoral ballots being counted from the state of Ohio because I think there was voter fraud in Cuyahoga County and an undercount in my home county. She represented Cleveland. Much as it may have served his purpose as the candidate for president, Al Gore, as the president of the Senate, said, no, the certification from Secretary of State Blackwell is what it is. George Bush is the winner. He counted those ballots and moved on. I mean, what a tough thing to have to do, but that's the way it is. He respected the process and the role that he was in. I had, let's just say, a much more fun time in 2008, 2009, when Vice President Cheney was presiding over the joint session of Congress and they were announcing the victory of Barack Obama and Joe Biden. But having been there in both cases, seeing the vice president of one party certify the election of the president coming from the opposite party, it was really interesting to see that in both cases, Al Gore and Dick Cheney put aside their partisan hat. They put us, not that we all didn't know it was there. They acted the scene they were in. And the scene they were in was to preside over the peaceful transfer of power with ballots, not bullets, because that's the way we do it in America.
That is a beautiful story. And I watched on C-SPAN actually a couple of clips of that last night just to refresh my memory. And it is just such a powerful scene to see the joint session and see them walk in. And they had these giant wooden boxes with them that they were carrying in. And it was just it is really sort of the Constitution in action when you see something like that. It was really amazing. That's a great question, Dakare. And Martha, when we talk about transferring the results to the joint session of Congress, I think you had mentioned that in North Carolina, y'all elect a president of the Electoral College, and that person or the Secretary of State is responsible for transmitting those results to Congress. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
The president of the Electoral College is basically just presiding over the meeting. And based on parliamentary procedure, he's conducting the meeting of the Electoral College. And I'm not 100% clear on this, but I believe the Secretary of State is the person who transmits the electoral votes, probably for all 50 states, to the United States Congress. And whether that's done these days, they probably do it electronically, but they probably also send up hard copy results, would be my guess, for the archives.
Okay. Janine, do you want to ask a question or?
Yes, a few. Usually I run the show and usually I have all the philosophical questions, but today I kind of have lightning round fact questions. So I remember someone saying to me a long time ago, I don't know, a decade ago or more, that electors' names remained secret because there could be so much pressure put upon them to vote a certain way. But that's not what I'm hearing today. So lightning round. Okay, Christine said no. Martha, no. It's all in the open.
It was
Okay,
apparently
right.
public because I got so much mail. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know
that's
where
true.
it was published, but
true.
it was published somewhere.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't know if in certain states, maybe it's, I don't know. Anyway, someone just said that a while back, but now we know that's not true. Okay. What are your responsibilities throughout the months? So I know, Christine, you don't have a long time from October to November, but do you have certain responsibilities from, say, Martha, when you're in June and the spring or summer until the big day? What are your responsibilities? Martha, I'll let you go first because.
I did not have any responsibilities at all until the day of, and to show up for the day of and be there on time. And in 2016, there was kind of a dry run the night before, but I don't remember. I had some kind of conflict. I couldn't do the dry run, but I said, well, I've done this before, so it shouldn't be any different. And they let me off the hook for the dry run, and I just showed up. We went to the Museum of History, which is across the street from our state capitol. And as we walked across to the state capitol, one of our leaders got the bright idea, which was a good one, for us all to sing God Bless America as we walked across the street. And so that was kind of we all felt really good doing that. It was moving. So I did not have any responsibilities other than that, but I will say I kept my credentials badge for quite a long time hanging on my car mirror, and I do still have it.
Where did you go? Where actually did you go to show? And this was I take it in December?
Yeah, it was in our state capitol building, and it was on I looked it up, Kathy. It was December 19th in 2016. It was in our state capitol building.
Okay, Christine, do you have anything you tell us about your experience throughout from October to November, and then walk us through it, just a little bit of your responsibilities.
Well, most of the electors I knew had been either they announce it when they've had an election in another state, so that they would be public. In our case, the state party released a list of all the electors, that was just posted, and in some cases, there was a press release that someone might put out to say that they were an elector. In any event, we went up the night before to Sacramento, which is our state capital, and I took my daughter Bella with me. And then that morning, we went over to the state capitol. Probably, as with Martha's experience, the governor of the state is actually technically the host because it's their Capitol building. So the office of the governor had the California Highway Patrol, which does security for the state capitol, make sure that we were all where we needed to be. We went to a conference room that they had set up in, I believe it was the state Senate conference room where they usually had their caucus meetings, where we made sure we had our badges for the floor. We also had a big oversized certificate. So we had a little packet for us with the certificate that said that we were an elector, with a copy of the oath that we had to take, and with our badge. So they made sure we were signed up and organized and all that. And then my friend took my daughter up to the gallery, and we went to the floor of the assembly, which is the bigger chamber in California, because we have 80 members and there are 55 electors. So they were, that we needed the room. On one side was the place where the press always is. They were located there. And then the staff side was the same. And the people presiding was our Secretary of State until we elected our president of our electoral college. So we were in there. We took the oath to, as Martha had referenced, to follow what the voters had done in our state. And then we proceeded to do the voting. So it's really kind of interesting. It might have been a very different experience. I'm jealous that Martha got to be an elector for a candidate who won the whole thing, because I'm sure it would, and the crowd dynamics might have been different, had they been there for someone who had won the whole election and not just the state. But still, it was really exciting. And as I said, the most striking thing to me was after we had gone through all of this electronic stuff and but her emails and the electronic campaigning and the television and this and that, still in the end, it was take your paper, take your pen, and, you know, back to the very basics like they did for 200 years.
Love that. Okay, I want everyone else to ask questions, so I can't hog the questions, but I do want to ask for clarity for our younger listeners. How many per state? How many electors per state? Just so everybody understands. Martha, you want to go first, please?
Yeah, I'll take that question. It's based on the number of congressmen plus your 2 senators for every state. So in North Carolina, we have 13 congressmen, 2 senators, so we have 15 electoral votes. And that's probably going to change for us with the new census, because we've been told that North Carolina is growing. We're the 9th largest state, and we're likely to gain at least 1 seat and maybe 2 after the 2020 census. So it's based on your members of Congress and your 2 senators.
Okay, so that's probably the same in everywhere, right, Christine? So, okay. So, Christine, last question. Who made those laws that were put up earlier, the regulations of December, you know, who made those? Christine,
Congress
do you know?
passed those laws. Actually, I'll tell you a story. The law was changed in 1936. In the election of 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president. And the inauguration was in March. And I know it was in March because my uncle was born on that day. And my grandparents named him after the president. His name was FDR D'Alessandro, my uncle Ruzi. So at the time, the inauguration was in March because it took that long after November. Remember, there were Pony Express and everything else. You know, we didn't have the level of transportation that we do now. So it was only changed in the 30s to make it, you know, when transportation had gotten better and communication was moving much more quickly, that they could have the lag time between the election in November and the inauguration in March be an election in November and the inauguration be January 20th, and therefore the Electoral College meeting sooner. So there's nothing in the Constitution that says the inauguration has to be on a specific day. That was actually something that was an act of Congress. And again, it's based on the fact that we can do things so much more quickly now than we could in the 30s when my Uncle Roosevelt was born.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, good to know. Cathy, back to you.
Well, we're going to go back to Tova in just a minute, but we've got one of our listeners and supporters of Constituting America, Robert Zimmerman, is asking, he wants to understand a little bit better the process of electing electors. And, you know, as we've noted, every state is different. And in some states, like in California, the electors are appointed. But in North Carolina, the electors are elected as they are in Virginia. But Martha, can you talk a little bit more about who elects the electors in North Carolina? Who votes for them?
Okay, well, I'll add a little bit more to the process, because at precinct meetings, delegates to county conventions are elected. And then at county conventions, delegates to district and state conventions are elected. So the delegates at the district convention are the ones that elected me in 2016 as the District 4 elector. And then in the 2 state at-large electors are elected by the entire delegates of or the delegates of the entire state at the state convention. So it's the delegates who themselves had to be elected to get to the conventions. So it's a bottom-up process.
And had you said that someone was disqualified as an elector, and that's how and why were they disqualified?
Yes, and I believe, I went back and tried to find this. I don't believe it's state statute, but I think it was North Carolina party rules, was that someone who served as an elected official could not serve as an elector. And the person that had been chosen for the 10th district, I believe, had been on the ballot in November and had been elected and already sworn in by December 19th. I don't know if it was a county commissioner or you know, register of deeds. I think it might have been something like clerk of court or register of deeds. And so they were disqualified because of that. And that's why I was able to serve in 2004.
And that's North Carolina's law. But then in California, Christine, I think can't elected officials serve as electors if they want to?
They can, and they can in New York, and they did. Like, for example, because Hillary Clinton was from New York, you had, like, I think the governor was an elector. You had elected officials here and there. So it depends on the state. My theory is always of grassroots politics, of like, you should, you know, give an opportunity to somebody who wouldn't otherwise really get it, or someone who earned it. Like I said, I had been on the campaign for 2.5 years. So by the time I asked, so I thought, well, that would stand up to anybody, regardless of my parentage. And I could have always asked another member of Congress, because in our state, it could be, they can reside anywhere in California. So as Martha was saying, it goes by, the number is determined by how many congressional districts you have. And in California, that's 53 plus our 2 senators. But it doesn't mean that Nancy Pelosi or Kevin McCarthy have to name somebody from San Francisco or Bakersfield. Kevin McCarthy can name somebody from anywhere in the state,
Right.
as can Nancy Pelosi. But generally speaking, elected officials like to pick someone from their area. It gives, you know, a boost to that person. And obviously, it's shall we say, you're also rewarding the grassroots, because the grassroots will say, oh, one of us got picked. So then that person has a connection to the volunteers with whom they've been working. But I think that in a lot of states, even if that's not technically the rule of not being an elected official, there's a strong sentiment in the parties, and Martha could speak to this on the Republican side, but at least on the Democratic side, that if you're already in elective office, then party office should really be for people who took a different route, and it's a little bit greedy to take both.
I agree.
Janine, did you have
Just to
something?
clarify for our, yes, please, just a clarification for the younger listeners. Christine, when you keep saying that your mom appointed you, I think that's what you're saying. We think federal and that, but it's the representative from each district that appoints the person in that district, or but you said it didn't have to be from that district, or are the federal?
Yes, the federal people. Yeah, the member of Congress appoints someone from the state of California to be a California elector. So while federal Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi could have picked somebody outside of her district, she has always preferred to pick someone who's one of her own constituents. But she's not bound to that. She just has to pick someone from within the state. And sometimes these lines are so different that you could have someone in the city of San Francisco, but they're like, you know, 10 blocks out of the congressional district, but there's still somebody who's like a beloved activist. And so you'd say, well, I'm going to pick them anyway, even if they're not in my congressional district, because they're still, you know, in my community. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility to do that. And also, as I said earlier, some members of Congress don't do that. They, for whatever reason, aren't interested in picking an elector. And so there's extras at the end, and the state party chair, under our rules, the Republican party chair or the Democratic party chair, picks, you know, it names the extra electors.
So the federal representative in the House elects people in their district or not in their district, essentially.
In their state,
they're the ones who,
yes.
And yeah, okay. All right, so well, shouldn't we get to Dakare and Tova again,
Yes,
Kathy?
definitely.
You know?
Tova?
Okay.
Sure. So, do you have any advice for somebody who wants to become an elector? What do you have any advice for how they can position themselves for that, or how they can get on the radar of the party?
You want me to take that one? I would say the first thing they need to do is to find out how their state does it and how their party does it, because if they're trying to get an appointment from a congressman and then they later find out, well, that's not the way we do it in this state, then they're up a creek. So the first thing to do is to learn the process and to find out how your state and your party does it. And if it's an election at district conventions, the way mine was, it usually involves being involved in the party for a long time so that people know you. Because generally, the delegates of that district are not going to vote for somebody they've never heard of or who just showed up for the first time at a district convention asking for a vote. So the advice I would have is to get involved early, pay your dues, you know, do the volunteer work, do the grunt work, do the phone calls, do the neighborhood canvassing, and basically kind of work your way up until you know a lot of the people in that district and know a lot of the people that you're asking for their votes.
Good advice. Christine, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, Martha said it perfectly. Volunteer.
And then just a quick clarification. Let's say you're a Republican elector, but a Democrat wins your state. Is there a role for you, or are you kind of done? Or, you know, vice versa, if you're a Democrat and a Republican wins your state?
No, there's no real role. There could be some kind of honorary thing that occurs in your state to recognize you, maybe at the next state convention or, you know, the next big dinner, fundraising dinner or something like that. But there's no formal constitutional role for an elector in a state where the winner was somebody different than who you were elected to support.
Good question. Dakare?
When you guys actually make your vote, how you feel, what are the emotions that arise? You know, are you like anxious? Or are you just like kind of get it done? Is it like a slow process and you're just kind of, you know, hanging on by the thread? Just tell me about, you know, your emotion, how you feel.
I would just say that there's just a real feeling of pride that you're fulfilling such an important constitutional role, that you're, in my case, I was with some friends, some people I knew, but I was also with people I didn't know who are now friends. In fact, we've talked about having a little reunion and we've never done it, but we really should. So I would just say that my overwhelming emotion would be pride. Pride in America, pride in the Constitution, pride in the process, and proud to be part of it.
Christine?
Beautifully said, Martha. I'll say this. When I first started dating my husband and I would celebrate, you know, what he called Hallmark holidays, he'd say, oh, I don't really do those. And I was like, well, you know what? You're marrying a ceremonial person. We're ceremonial people. And so for me, I thought it was a really big deal. I thought it was something that was important. It was constitutional. I wanted my daughter to see it. I knew in my case also I'd be making a speech on the floor to my colleagues, but also to the country. So I had a special thing that I was doing, but I was very much, again, acting the scene I was in. I was very present. I was very focused. I thought it was a moment of great pride and import. And I was actually really resentful of one particular politician because we're all there. And granted, no one really talked to me because they saw I was at my desk rewriting my speech and working on it. And they'd given me a desk up front. But remember, it's a big delegation, 55 different people, and the two tellers are walking back and forth with all of the pieces of paper. And this one politician who was running for a different office was walking around trying to get support for the seat that he wanted against another Democrat and trash talking the guy. And I was like, you know what? We're in the middle of a constitutional process. You can campaign another day. And I went over to the governor's staff when I was finished. And I said to his chief of staff, by the way, just so you know, this guy's a problem. And he's going to be a problem for you, because the governor was supporting the person that this elected official was trashing. I said, so I hope you have it together, because this guy's just been polling the entire electoral college. Most of the people are like, I'm in the middle of working through my feelings about how I feel about Hillary losing or being a part of history anyway. And this guy's just playing literally politics as usual. It was a really bad look. So I would say, be a ceremonial person if you're at a ceremony, whatever it is. Even if you're just an observer, understand how important it is to the people who are engaged there. And if you don't think that you can be present, then you shouldn't be there. And if they are in a zone, in their elector zone or their legislative zone or whatever zone that's in, where they're in the moment, and you're not adding to that feeling, save whatever your agenda is for another day.
Yeah, that was totally inappropriate.
Yeah, I can't imagine campaigning at the Electoral College. That's pretty wild.
It's a jerk.
And what I think is beautiful about this is actually seeing the nonpartisan aspects and people coming together to do their ceremonial duty. That's, you know, about the country. It's really, really refreshing.
Several people in the audience that are asking about what would happen if an elector votes against the voters, against what the voters in his state voted for. Another question about from Mr. Zimmerman, are electors always bound as to their vote? Do y'all have any insights on binding of the votes of electors? Christine?
Well, they had a case about that. There, a lot of states after 2016 passed what they called faithless elector laws to find out, you know, to basically eliminate that, to say that whether you're somebody who doesn't like the outcome of the election, so you want to vote for somebody else. The idea is, I think, essentially two things. One, if you really don't like the outcome of the election because you ran for delegate in the spring and the other person was nominated and now you're being an elector, then step aside and let the alternative step in, right? That's what the alternate is for. Not just in Martha's case where the person went on to get themselves elected, which is a good thing, but if you have a faithless issue, then, you know, most states now have passed laws that clarify that the vote belongs to the state. It does not belong to you as an individual elector. And so you might start to see some talk. There's all sorts of wild talk going on now of what will happen in 2020. Could, back to Kari's question, could a Republican Secretary of State send Republican electors instead of Democrats, or vice versa? Could a Democratic Secretary of State in a state that Trump won say, well, I'm sending the Democrats? No, that's not going to happen. They can talk a good game about what they want. In the end, the votes belong to the state. And that is why they will be cast for the state with as many electoral votes as the Constitution and the census apportion to that state.
Great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
I think I might add to that, the vote belongs to the people, right? Within the state. But if the people's
Right.
vote, an elector can't change what the majority of the people have said. That's really.
Martha, I mean, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think the only thing that I was going to say is I believe most of those state laws that were either already in place or enacted afterwards basically say, regardless of how a faithless elector might vote, that the vote is still turned in as the way the state voted. That not that it's nullified. In other words, we wouldn't have had 14-0. We would, instead of 15-0, we would have still had 15-0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have one other audience question, which is a great question because we have so many young people listening, and we hope our young people do get involved and aspire to be electors or elected officials, or, you know, just be involved. But Karen Hensley asks, is there an age requirement for electors? And again, that would probably be by state, but do y'all know in North Carolina or California, is there an age requirement for electors, or have you ever heard of a really young elector by any chance?
I haven't, but I would assume anyone who's registered to vote would be eligible.
Yeah, actually, one year my mom picked someone who was the youngest elector. They were 18. You have to be in California. You have to be able to vote, and they were, I guess, by weeks and months or whatever the tally was. It happened that the person that she selected in 2004 was the youngest person to be an elector. I think they turned like 18, like on election day or something. So, but you have to be, in California, you have to be a voter in order to be an elector.
Well, that's a great thing for everybody listening to aspire to. So we hope y'all all try to be electors at one point or another in your lifetime. Would you like to make any closing comments as we wrap up here?
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated. Remember, today actually happens to be National Voter Registration Day. So check with your Secretary of State to make sure that you're registered. Even if you think you are, make sure that you and the state agree on that. and find out how you can get a ballot or absentee or vote in person, whatever your rules are for your state, but make sure you're registered and take the opportunity to remind your friends. And also to remember that this is the most important process that we have, is electing the president and vice president of the United States by the popular vote and by transmission of those votes by state into electoral college ballots. And again, whether you see a Republican president of the Senate, vice president of the United States, having to turn over power to a Democrat, or a Democratic vice president, president of the United States Senate, turning over power to a Republican president. The point is, we do it with ballots, not bullets. That's what makes us great, and that's what makes America a beacon to the world, that we still believe in the integrity of one person, one vote. So get out there and make yours count.
Well said. And it was George Washington who actually shocked the world by George Washington shocked the world by actually handing over his presidency to John Adams. No one had ever seen anything like that. I would have loved to have been there at that moment. Okay, do you want to close, Martha?
Well, I'll just close by saying make sure that you get informed and get involved. And we aren't just electing our president and vice president, we're electing 1/3 of our Senate and all of our congressmen. So learn the issues, learn the candidates, and exercise your right to vote.
Yes, that's what we always say.
Amen.
You know, it's interesting, Christine and Martha, when I'm giving these speeches all over the country, I ask, how often do they vote? And the majority of the students always say 4 years. And I say, well, why? And they say, because the president's on the ballot. And then I always say, no, but listen, we have representatives and congressmen and women and senators, and judges and all kinds of people that are on the ballot as well. And every 2 years, it's very important to vote in the midterms, as well as every 4 years. So there's this misnomer that the president's supposed to be the most important person, when actually it's supposed to be checked and balanced. I just personally want to say thank you, everyone, for listening today. I thank you for our donor that sponsored this show. And I thank you, Martha and Christine, for coming on today. You were our first experience of having a bicameral Zoom, not bicameral,
Bi-coastal too.
Bipartisan. Bipartisan. So this went really well. You set the trend, just like George Washington. It was very exciting for us. So thank you. And I'll let everyone else say.
We've learned so much. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. It was very enlightening, and we just are so honored to have you both with us. So thank you. It was a great learning opportunity for us and for everybody with us today.